In the world of poker, there are two separate yet equally important types of players: those who speak and those who listen. These are their stories.
Wow, that was way better than episode 4 when you did the gavel sound.
Want to hear it again?
Well, no, I'd rather start talking now.
And you'll expect me to listen?
Of course.
Huh. In this episode of the Eightfold Path of Poker Enlightenment, Tommy Angelo is going to tell us what right speech is all about. If anyone needs this one, it's gotta be me. I'm Wayne Lively, the one who talks too much and keeps on going and going and going on and on and on about hands until people are finding clever ways to commit suicide.
Wayne?
Yes, Tommy.
I think it's time for you to be quiet now.
I hear you.
In this episode, we're going to look at right speech as it pertains to the internet and table poker and just life in general. So we're going to start out just by defining right speech. We're going to use the same tactic we used in right view, which is we're just going to look at wrong speech. And for that, we're going to go to our trusty resource on these matters. Wayne, tell me, give me an example of the type of thing you would say, at the end of a poker hand, playing table poker.
Are you out of your mind?
Well, I already knew that whatever you said there was going to be wrong speech. You were very reliable. So let's say, how about like nice hand? Sometimes people say nice hand.
Of course.
But they don't really mean it.
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
Down at the MGM Grand, one of my very best friends said, "Have you ever noticed how when you say nice hand, there's sarcasm dripping all over it?"
Well, that would be wrong speech, and right speech would be without the sarcasm. We're talking about.
I'm not sure I can do that.
Well, I'm sure you can't do it. But
we're going to find out about reciprocity here in a minute.
We are talking about basically walking around with a halo on and just trying to be a good dude, a good gal, not say things that annoy people, not say things that bother people. Later on, we'll talk about the idea that intentionally saying those things can be more profitable than not saying them. So we'll look at it from all sides.
We can't skip ahead?
That's the fun part.
Well, okay. I'll wait.
Early on, we talked about how the various parts of the path are interwoven, and right speech is a great example. We're oftentimes not thinking about every single word when it comes out of our mouth. It's just reflection of what's inside our mind. And so that's why right view you could think of as being the primary cause of right speech. And as usual, we're not going to stray too far from the idea of tiltlessness and reducing suffering. Right speech is one of the essential ingredients of both of those things. When we can control what's in our mind, which controls the words that come out of our mouth, it allows us to be much more tiltless, because instead of agitating a situation with the things we say, we can calm the situation and calm ourselves down. And then that also is a direct cause of the reduction of suffering. It's like you can absorb the negative stuff that's thrown at you when you are able to not react to it with negative speech. And so right speech is a combination of all these things interwoven.
Nice speech.
Thank you very much.
I realize that with right speech, you're going to try to convince me to stop tapping on the glass. Okay? So here's your opportunity. Why do we need right speech?
Well, tapping on the glass, you're talking about criticizing the bad players, right? Like
Yeah, scaring the fish. Yes.
scaring the fish. Well, there's really two aspects of it. One is just, does it cost you money externally, and does it just make for a bad game situation? Is it going to maybe make people quit that wouldn't have quit if you hadn't have harassed them, or is it going to make people maybe play better? Some people think it does to varying degrees. So that's the external effect of that form of what I would call wrong speech, of tapping on the glass.
Okay.
And then there's the internal part, which is you're stirring up some negative mojo inside you. You know, it's already in your mind. That's how it manages to go from your mind out your mouth. But if you put a cork in your mouth, maybe it'll back up all this crap that's in there, and it'll just stay festering in your mind, and nobody will ever hear it.
You're trying to make my brain explode again, aren't you? We just got that mess cleaned up. Yeah, we just got that mess cleaned up from last time.
I really do think if you walked around with a cork for a while, your brain might just blow up.
It's certainly going to shoot wax out of my ears, that's for sure. So what you're saying is that by doing right speech, you actually are clearing your mind of the evil that could put you on tilt.
That's true. Yeah, it's another form of, you could think of it in this context that we're talking about as another form of just controlling your mind.
Purifying your thoughts.
And yeah, purifying your thoughts and not having your mind just run wild and be out of control, and words just come out of your mouth with no thinking or no thought of the consequence or whatever. So here we're talking about the undoing of wrong speech in a sense, but that is the same as right speech. You can proactively say right things, or you can proactively not say wrong things, but it's all part of right speech.
We're talking miracles, but let's give it a shot.
Well, anything's possible in small steps.
Let your fingers do the walking. It's not just for the yellow pages anymore. How am I ever going to not type in the chat box?
Well, amputation?
That may be the only way. I do like tapping on the aquarium when it comes to the chat box. And I know you're going to tell me it's the wrong thing to do, and I just let you go.
Okay. Let's just look at typing in the chat box purely from an EV standpoint and weigh the pros and cons. Let's say that you were only going to make this decision based on what made you the most money. Do you think your probability of making misclicks is increased or decreased by typing in the chat box?
Probably doesn't make that much difference because my mouse hasn't survived to that point. Usually I throw the mouse against the wall, then I type in the chat box. So misclick, I don't know. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be positive EV from a misclick standpoint to be typing and zinging back and forth, especially if you're playing like 4, 8, 12 games.
Yeah, that's the only thing actually that keeps me from chatting away is, I just keep adding tables until I can no longer chat.
Yeah. So that's one very simple, fairly obvious reason to not chat.
Right.
Okay, the other reason would be to look at it from, or another reason would be to look at the whole thing from the information standpoint, or information reciprocality. If it's positive EV to give less information than they do, and it's positive EV to accept more information than they get, then again, it's obvious that not chatting at all, it gives up zero information, and it means you're always getting more than they are because you're getting something and they're getting nothing. So doesn't that make sense as another reason to not chat?
Absolutely. So what is right speech as it pertains to the internet?
Well, right speech as it pertains to the internet in general, we're going to look at it in terms of posting online is a form of speech online,
okay.
which is a major area of energy expenditure for a lot of us. And then also IMing. So IMing brings in two facets. One is what we actually say and don't say, and then the act of IMing as being just like chatting. So I see IMing as just an extension of chatting in the actual chat box of the poker game, in the sense that it's more likely to make you misclick.
Okay.
Okay, you're not giving information directly to your opponents that you're playing against, but it's going to make you more likely to misclick. And also another aspect is just concentration. Even more important than misclicking, really, is if you're actively IMing and you have conversations or a conversation going, and just think of your brain as having a certain amount of capacity to focus on things. So let's say you have 100 units of focusing power and you divert some of that energy to anywhere else, whether it's watching a football game or chatting with a friend. It just so happens that any language involvement uses up a lot of brain wattage. You're directly taking that away from the poker game. There's nowhere else it can come from. So even though you could think, okay, I can play this game blindfolded and it's just routine and blah, blah, blah. Well, great. But we're still talking about degrees. So if you can put more focus on the game, I believe that that is going to increase your earn, flat out. Now, there is a flip side to everything. You could say that chatting has some sort of soothing effect, some calming effect, some sort of
Tension release.
Pardon me?
Tension release.
Tension release. Personal interaction is a good thing. It can make you feel good. And it could supply humor. Somebody could say something funny to you in the IM, and that raises your just how you feel. I mean, we want to be happy, right? So all these factors weigh in. So I'm not going to sit here and say you should absolutely never, ever type a single word while you're playing.
But you have to realize that the possible positives of typing in the chat box are not going to outweigh the probable negatives of typing in the chat box.
I believe that for most people, most of the time, that's true. But I can't say it's always true. So really, this is, again, like all these things, is like awareness is the most important thing. And being willing to experiment and test on your own awareness. So one thing I have suggested to clients before, that we've talked about this and they think, okay, I think I would make more money if I didn't IM, but I don't necessarily want to give up IMing altogether. And what I tell them is, well, experiment. Say I'm going to play for a half an hour. You know, the object of the game, your next session or next 10 sessions, you say, I'm going to play for an hour and I'm not going to IM, period. If somebody IMs me, I'm not going to reply. And it's a test. And then only when you've done a controlled study like that can you evaluate it afterwards and say, well, the emotional entanglement with people IMing was actually good for my poker game. Or, wow, I had no idea that just by not IMing, I would read the game so much better and pick up on those spots when I should be bluffing. That's what I think most people lose at No Limit, is missing out on bluffing opportunities because they just weren't watching. You know, it goes check, check, and you had a pocket fives, and the board comes, you know, queen, jack, jack, and you're playing so many games and you're thinking, okay, I missed my 5. I'm done with that table. I go back over here. But then the action goes check, check to you, and you check, and then the turn comes and another card pairs or whatever, and they check, check again, and you could have bet half the pot there and taken it down. 90% of the time, hugely plus EV play. Again, you know, maybe not a great example, but these situations come up all the time where typical players, good players, miss out on little routine bluffing opportunities because they're IMing. So you got to be willing to experiment on yourself and be willing to at least entertain the thought that IMing is negative EV compared to not IMing. So Wayne, when you're posting at Deuces Crack, do you ever write something, put it up there, and regret having said what you said because of the language being too coarse or mean or vindictive or anything like that?
Shortly before I'm hit with the band stick. Yeah, that's been known to happen.
The edit feature is nice, but there's a time limit on that, right?
Yeah, and usually I find out about the band stick before I hit the edit. Yeah, it's happened on occasion. Yeah, sure. I mean, there's plenty of times when I would actually like to be maybe more stronger than I actually do.
Right. Either way, it can go either way.
I oftentimes maybe over edit when maybe I could say something that is a little more honest, if perhaps
that's a good
love.
point, because so far I've been sort of angling this toward the idea of eliminating wrong speech, but bringing out right speech is the same thing. Integrity, honesty, forthrightness.
Tough love.
So Yeah, tough love. They're all part of right speech. One of the things that is the same about posting on the internet and actually talking is that if we just take a minute to not be so reactive, then we're a little more likely to really say what we want to say in the way we want to say it. So one of the problems with talking with people when we say things we regret is because we just immediately reacted. We didn't take even a split second to not even so much think about it, but just to pause so that we're not mindlessly reacting. Now, on the internet, we have that opportunity, but sometimes we still don't do it. I've been heavily involved in some message boards long before I ever posted about poker on the internet. But that's one of the reasons when I did start posting at 2+2 10 years ago, I was able to rise above it a lot. A lot of situations where people would say, oh, you're just a complete idiot or whatever. I never reacted. I never reacted negatively to those comments, but that's only because I had done several years of completely mindless negative reaction. So the posting
You mean
on the
at
internet.
one time you owned a pair of asbestos underwear for the Flame Wars?
Oh, you cannot imagine what a flame warrior I was. You wouldn't believe it. You would
Oh,
not.
I
I
can
call it.
imagine.
I have a little term for it. I call it the unraveling thread, because it really is like pulling on a thread on a garment. Except it also is a nice wordplay because it's an actual thread. But if I wrote something and somebody objected to what I said, I would reply. And if they replied, I would reply. And if they replied, I would reply for
Last word syndrome.
till somebody died,
Last
till they
word.
gave up.
Last word syndrome.
I'd done it hundreds of times. And so, by the time I got to 2+2, I had learned how to not do that. And it also does apply toward speaking in regular life. Now, the interesting thing about the posting on the internet about poker hands or anywhere else, but we're talking about poker, is that you would think that because you do have that opportunity to stop, it isn't like an actual conversation, that we would be a little more inclined to be able to control ourselves. And we are. I mean, it's built in. But what I'm suggesting here with right speech is that you not be so reactive when you actually read the words. You read the words and the guy says, I think you play this hand like a complete moron. And what you want to train yourself is to, instead of reacting like, well, you're a moron too, and I'll show you, blah, 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 blah. You look at that and you recognize there's a human being with some thoughts in his mind, just like everyone else. And when people read, they react. They either agree or they disagree or they're neutral. And it's the nature of message boards that people tend to post when they disagree. That's just how they work. And so if you post something, there's a high probability that you're going to get a disagreeing reaction. So we know all that logically. So now what you do is when you read a post where a guy says, I think you played that like an idiot, and besides that, I hate you, then you just sit up in your chair and you breathe and you relax and you're like, okay, I'm going to react to this mindfully. And you have some choices. You can type a cogent reply that tries to be a little less abrasive than you might have been because you took the time to not be reactive. Or you might do this, rise completely above it and not even reply and just let it go.
So, you ignorant bastard is over the top?
That would not, now if you did that mindfully, it might be okay. There was a guy at 2+2, and I went through an experimental phase at Limit Hold'em at Bay 101 playing 48 and 8160, where I was experimenting with a strategy from the blinds with ace king and ace queen of not re-raising ever. And no matter what the flop came, I would check and call. This is a heads up. And then I would check the turn, no matter what. This was like a devised strategy I built up over a year. And then that's where I would start playing the hand at the turn. If he bet, I might call, I might check raise, might fold, whatever. But I was anticipating this pattern all the way. I wrote many, many hands on 2+2 where I was telling these stories of these betting patterns, but I never once wrote why. And I might have mentioned that I was experimenting. But there was one guy that posted that every single time I posted, no matter what, and I was posting like a hand a week, his reaction was very, very, very negative. And I never wrote one reply to him ever. There was one thread there David Sklansky started called Tommy Angelo-itis. Apparently David had read some of these threads and had drawn some conclusions and made some assumptions, and he wrote a post. And there were many, many replies. A lot of guys saying, oh yeah, this guy's a complete idiot, has no idea what he's talking about. Other people are saying, David, you came down too hard on him. And David came back and said, well, I was just joking. The number of posts I wrote in that thread was 0. And this was right when I was beginning to get this skill or this ability to not react to ideas. It's just ideas. It's just thoughts. It's nothing. It's just like there's humans, they're walking around, they got brains, they generate ideas. My happiness, my well-being does not need to be dependent on that, ever.
I know it won't make you feel any better. I know it will not make you feel any different whatsoever. But the truth is, David actually was kidding.
Oh, I know he was.
And that he was actually, when he told me about it, he said, I named a disease after him. And he thought it was, he actually was, and he said, he's the only one I ever named a disease after.
Well, I must admit, the portion of me that is ego was flattered, no doubt. But I got to tell you, an important part of this thing is that I played with Mason Malmuth many, many times, 2040 at the Mirage in the old days. I've only played with David one time, and I went to Bellagio one time intentionally to hopefully get a chance to play with him because I just wanted to sense his being at the table. And so I went over to Bellagio, 11 o'clock in the morning. He was there. The game hadn't started yet. Everyone's huddling around. I already knew that was the starting time at that time for the 8160 game. And so I went up and introduced myself. And this was probably a year after the Tommy Angelo-itis thread. And I went up and I said, hi, David. Put my hand out. I'm Tommy Angelo. His immediate reply has impressed me to this day and made me a bigger David Sklansky fan than anything he's ever written. He looked at me and he smiled and he said, so how are the treatments coming? Isn't that nice? And that's when I knew it was all in good spirit. But this is another whole thing is, we make assumptions. Yes. We read things and we overassume what people are thinking. And that's why thought is such a dangerous thing, because thoughts come out of people's mouths. They intend one thing, but it's interpreted another way. And then another misinterpretation goes back. And it's especially dangerous, as we know, online. It's a little harder to communicate. And that's why the ability to just rise above it all when you want to is just really, really powerful and is a big part of our theme, which is suffering less and tilting less. And so the act of not being thrown on tilt by what people say is an essential skill along this path.
One of the things to be very cautious of is the seduction of anonymity.
That's a great point. It applies to chatting in the chat box and posting on the message board.
So often it is incredibly seductive to know that we're just nothing more than a screen name. They're not going to come to our house and beat us up. They're not going to call us up and call us nasty names. They're going to do it in the chat box, or they're going to do it on the forums. But we can say pretty much anything that we want to do.
Yeah.
And in that way, it is very, very easy to say things that we wouldn't say in real life.
Yeah, that we might regret later, or just makes us feel bad for even having said them.
It not only makes the other people feel bad, but I think it makes us feel bad about ourselves as well.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing you don't want to do is poison your own mind.
That's a great way of looking at it. It's exactly right. The anonymity can bring out the poison in us, in a sense, and just like infect us in that way.
Without a doubt. We've come now to the end of right speech as regards to internet poker. When we come back, we'll be talking about stillness, and we'll be talking about putting people on tilt. These are two topics that apply to both internet poker and table poker. And
Let me explain what I mean by stillness. Let's say that you have a generator running in the background that's putting out 30 decibels, which is a level of sound, of noise. And there's another sound going on behind the generator that's 20 decibels. Well, you won't hear it. The only sounds you're going to hear are anything louder than 30 decibels. In our normal state, when we sit down at the table, our minds are like a noisy generator. They're just constantly churning away mind noise. And the only things that we can receive from our opponents are sounds that are louder than our own mind, emotions and feelings. That has to do with, the mental noise. So you need to still your mind and keep it quiet, and then you can hear what's coming in at all levels. Equally as important is your physical noise. When you're talking, when you are actually making sounds, you're like that noisy generator. You're simply not going to hear sounds that other people make and things that they say sometimes, when that might have been absolutely pivotal information. So the whole idea of being still is the way to literally crush your opponents in the information war, because you receive more information and you send less.
well, where I come from, there's an old saying that you are given two ears and one mouth for a very good reason, because listening is twice as important as speaking. Tommy, earlier in this episode, you made this statement.
We are talking about basically walking around with a halo on and just, trying to be a good dude, a good gal, not say things that annoy people, not say things that bother people. Later on, we'll talk about the idea that intentionally saying those things can be more profitable than not saying them.
Now, I've got to challenge you on this.
All right.
I cannot see a situation where a guy can make more money by being an asshole than being a nice guy. Mike Caro said that a happy table is a gambling table. And I've been in situations where some guy is trying to put the whole table on tilt, and he thinks that's the way he's going to make more money. So, okay, you tell me a situation, a scenario, you defend what you said that it can be more profitable.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at it two ways. One, like generally, theoretically, and then I'll come up with an actual specific. In theory, if you're sitting there playing, you're playing against five guys, you're a six-handed game, and none of them are tilting. They're all playing their A game. In theory, if one or more of them would start tilting, that would bring you profit. So we're starting with the assumption that tilting opponents equals profit. So in theory, if you go do something that actually causes people to tilt more than they would tilt if you hadn't have done it, that can be a genuine profit source. And that's why I wanted to bring this up. And there are a lot of people that believe that that's true, whether they do it or not, and there are some people that do it. A situation could be you're sitting there playing and a guy just gets off the phone and you could tell he's agitated by something. Either he was talking to his bookie, or he's talking to his girlfriend, or whatever, and you could tell he just finished up with a conversation that didn't go very well. And you could say something to stir the pot, something to agitate him. It doesn't even have to be a case of being a complete asshole. It doesn't have to be a case of trying to put the whole table on tilt. It can be little needles. I mean, people needle people constantly at poker. Now, there are a lot of reasons that people do needling, but I do think that sometimes people send out their needles, their lances, their swords, their jabs, with the sole intent of tilting a certain person by pushing their hot buttons, with the hope that that will cause them to play worse. And
Have you ever done that?
yes, I have.
Give me a scenario.
Well, I used to be such a good needler that I kind of had to quit because I mean, I had ways of saying things. It's been a long, long time. I don't know if I can think of anything. Um, I would say, a guy's bitching about a hand or whatever, and I would just find the right things to say at the right time to cause him more pain. Now, I can't really say, though, that I did that specifically to make more money. I did it because I was an asshole sometimes. Assholeness is assholeness. In the context here of right speech, I do believe that ultimately it's better to not be an asshole, not to say those things, because I think they harm ourselves just as much as they harm anybody else. One of the recurring themes we're getting into more and more here is the idea of putting yourself and your happiness and that of others above profit. And this is a pretty clear case. But since we are talking about right speech, I must concede that for some people in certain situations, they do make more money by being an asshole. I do believe that.
Is it often enough or enough money to outweigh all of the times that it's a mistake, that it crushes the spirit of the game, that it drives people away from the game, that it puts you on tilt?
Those are all the counterpoints. There's always something else on the other side of the balance sheet. And all of those are on the other side of the balance sheet. The risk of putting yourself on tilt compared to not stirring it up, because what if the other guy sends it back and puts you on tilt? And then you might run somebody out of the game who was already a profit source, and you were trying to get more out of them by tilting them, and they're like, the hell with you, I'm out of here. All of those go on the opposite side of the balance sheet. So I'm definitely not saying that being an asshole is more profitable. I'm just saying that, one, there are people who believe it is, whether it is or not.
Who we want to convince it's not.
Well, all I'm trying to get him to is examine it, re-examine it with awareness, and really look at the whole situation.
What is this thing with you and penguins playing poker?
Penguins?
Yeah. You're always talking about nun poker. You have this obsession with Catholic ladies playing poker. I thought they play bingo.
No, they count the money from the bingo.
Oh, so what is this thing about nun poker?
Are you talking about mum poker?
Uh-oh. Never mind. So, now that I know the difference between nun poker and mum poker, why don't you tell me what mum poker is?
Well, mum poker is just what it doesn't sound like. Wait a second.
Just what it doesn't sound
it's
like.
Just what you think it wouldn't sound like.
We're probably...
No, what I mean is...
Maybe we should just be quiet.
We should have a breathing break.
Not again. No.
Mum poker, actually...
Where did you come up with mum poker? Let's do that.
I've never written or told anyone where the actual words came from. This is another case of reassignment of meaning. Back when I played in Columbus, Ohio, I was playing for a living in a circuit of home games, and there was a house dealer and everything, and there were some very interesting characters. I used to play poker with a guy named Doc. I even played gin with him, which was a bigger mistake. And we had such a crew of characters, you can tell just by the names. There was a guy named Nervous John, and we had a guy named Slippery. That was his name.
This is what we used to call felony poker, right?
Right. And I don't know if these guys might actually end up hearing this someday. So Slippery sometimes would get in this state where he was really agitated by other people talking, which is really ironic since he had the biggest jabber mouth you could possibly imagine. He would talk and irritate the hell out of everyone. But when he was feeling a little bit tender, he wanted everyone to be quiet. And the way he would say that is he would just go, it was more like he was pleading, mum poker, mum poker. So somebody would be jabbing away and he would just say, mum poker. So that's how this phrase got planted in my head. It was like his way of saying, shut the fuck up. So years later, when I started talking less and less at the table, and I do like to come up with names to label whatever seems like it could use a label, mum poker was already there in my mind. It's like, okay, that's what I'm going to call this act of not talking while playing. So that's basically where it came from.
I'll be darned. You've heard it here first, folks. An exclusive. All right. We like that. So you came up with the name. Now let me describe it, folks. Playing poker with Tommy is like playing with a statue. It is like playing with a machine. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't look around. He doesn't interact. He sits up straight, and that's it.
That's true. You were talking about anonymity earlier. It's really funny. When I do the full mum poker thing, I get the same anonymity that I get playing online. And that because I'm not going to react to my own absurd plays, I can do the craziest play imaginable. And because I know I'm going to sit there anyway and not do anything, it doesn't even matter. So it's a dangerous form of live poker anonymity.
I tell you how much it is, folks. A couple of years ago, Tommy and I were playing at the Wynn. And this guy at the table was just absolutely as obnoxious as you would ever find in a poker game. And I'm sitting at the end of the table. Tommy is with a client at the other end of the table. And this guy started needling Tommy. And he was just needling. And
just because he said something, I didn't react.
He says, "You're a pro." He says, "You're a pro, aren't you?"
The first time I didn't react to his question was when he started kneeling.
Right. And I saw this little grin come on Tommy's face. And it just blew my mind because he never reacts. He is, in the mum poker moment. But he had this little smile on his face. So later we went to the poker meeting at the off strip in Vegas, and I asked Tommy about it, and here's the rest of the story, folks, and it's one of the best stories I've ever heard.
Well, this guy, about 4 years earlier, I was playing at Foxwoods, and that's the first time I met him, and we were playing like 20-40 limit in the middle of the night, and I was sitting right next to him, and he was an extremely boisterous, loud player, always making sounds. And what happened then was he asked me some question or said something to me, and he's very used to commenting to new players when they sit down or saying something. And as soon as he got no reaction at all from me, he kind of went nuts. In fact, I wrote about him in my book, where this is the guy that he kept getting more and more amped up and more amped up, and he wasn't getting any kind of rise out of me at all. And then he kind of got it, and he said, "Hey, I like that shirt." And I said, "Thanks, my wife bought it for me." And we had like this moment of connection because he realized I wasn't not talking to him. What I was doing was I just wasn't talking about poker. As soon as he brought up some non-poker topic, I engaged immediately and friendly. And so that was a very interesting exchange. What was really funny about what happened with you, Wayne, was that was the same guy 4 years later. And exactly the same thing happened. He said something to me as soon as I sat down. I didn't react, and he just went off and would not let up. And that's why I was laughing.
Same guy.
Same guy.
Same guy.
Same
the
drill.
one who said, "I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you." And you said, "I'm listening." So, Tommy, would I be the minimum to your maximum?
I think that would be wishful thinking on your part. You're more like mini mom.
Or maxi minimum?
You're just maxi.
That's probably true, yeah.
Well, sorry to break the news to you, but
No news there.
So
What is the difference between maximum and minimum?
Well, maximum and minimum are just 2 degrees of mum poker. Minimum means that you don't talk about poker. You don't say the words spade, flush, deuce, bad beat,
Douchebag.
douchebag, donk. You just don't engage any players ever in the act of talking about poker hands, which
You're,
sounds simple, but it's very hard to do when you get to the end of a
you're
hand.
going to make me cry.
Well, it takes some real effort for a lot of people because a guy says to you, did you have such and such or whatever, says some comment that kind of stabs at you inside, and you don't talk about poker at all. But if the guy starts talking about anything else, football, the weather, you can just totally engage like a normal person. That's
Douchebag.
minimum. So maximum is just all the way with it, where you just don't talk about anything. And it sounds much more bizarre than it is, but what happens is once you start doing it, people get it. And people do respect someone's right to not talk at the poker table. The way I like to put it is you have the right to remain silent. And you really do. It's a rare social setting where you don't have to engage with people, and it's perfectly fine to do that. And usually you'll find that they respect that. They'll just leave you alone and you can create your own little shell over there. And this has great benefits if what you want to do is stay focused, stay concentrated, not be in the middle of a conversation right when key information is coming or key bets are going. So it's a really great way to just put a little bubble around yourself so that you can play your A game.
And they respect your right to remain silent.
That's right. They respect my right to remain silent. Whereas more like in your case, you have the right to remain silent, but don't.
Douchebag. Last night I had a crash on 6th Street.
Ouch.
Yeah. Bad beat. I lost it. I said things that I shouldn't have said.
6th Street is a bad place to be driving around without your seatbelt on.
Ain't it the truth? Why don't you explain to folks out there what 6th Street is, what we're talking about?
6th Street is everything that happens at the table, at table poker, after the betting is over. As soon as the last hand is folded or the last call is made, the instant that the betting action has finished, 6th Street starts.
And the hand isn't over until 6th Street is done, right?
Right. In fact,
this can go on for a long
it
time.
can go on for years. Some hands that it can, but typically at the table it goes on till the next hand. But actually, a lot of times I've been watching these poker shows on TV, the high stakes poker shows, and very often 6th Street continues into the next hand.
Oh yeah, it have. In fact, it can go on for a long time.
Yeah.
Especially when somebody's playing mum poker.
Right.
At high stakes poker, when they're not giving out any information.
Right. Two guys will be. That's one thing you find out if you play mum poker is people will start talking about you quite a bit right there at the table.
As if you're not there.
Right. Yeah, they really will.
And it's a place where you really got to be careful, 6th Street.
Well, 6th Street
you can get mugged on 6th Street.
You can get mugged on 6th Street, but you can also make a ton of money on 6th Street by not giving up information, because this is where the huge disparity exists between the amount of information potentially given and the amount potentially not given, because people give up huge amounts of information on 6th Street. They give up emotional information, they give up information about what they played, how they played. Even if they're lying about their hand, they're still giving information about their thought process.
Yeah. What are shameless showdowns?
The shameless showdown is just the act of turning your hand over shamelessly, no matter what. So let's say that you made a play that you think is a terrible play and you got called, and it's your turn to turn your hand over. You don't say, I missed. You don't say, what do you got? You just turn it over. Even if it's the most preposterous, outrageous hand it doesn't matter. Even if you're ashamed, or if you think other people would be ashamed if they did it, you just turn that hand over. And so you take a key moment when other people would be feeling some sort of hesitancy, and because you just do it with such confidence that you actually spin it around and you exude a very confident image, even at a time when you're displaying a really bad play or a really crazy play.
And no splaining.
And no splaining. Splaining is a way of saying the word explaining, but explaining means explaining what you did and why you did it. Making excuses for what you did, or saying anything at all. It's one way to cut off splaining is to not initiate a discussion. That's relatively easy. The hard one is when somebody else says something to you first that invites you into a discussion to explain. And that's where it's extra hard to shut off the valve, but it's also extra important too.
Do you have a way of shutting this down?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us about it?
Yes.
Do you have more than you can say than yes?
Yes.
I think we're going to get it sooner or later.
Yes, you are.
All right.
You're going to get it.
Shut off answers. That's what we're trying to get into here.
Shut off answers is
cool.
Let's say, yeah, they are cool. They're really cool, especially when you do them and you feel them work.
Did you have a set?
Yes.
Were you on a flush draw?
Yes.
Did you hit?
Yes.
Did I have you beat?
Yes.
What else are they going to say? What are they going to say after that?
There's nothing they can say.
It closes down 6th Street.
Yeah, it does. Anytime anyone asks you a specific question about a specific hand or a specific anything, you just say yes, and there's nowhere for the conversation to go.
If you were looking for something that was worth the price of admission for sitting here for all these hours listening to this, this is what it is. This is the greatest thing in the world. Just say yes.
Just say yes.
It shuts it all off.
And it can be fun because depending on how you say it, sometimes they'll know that you're jerking their chain, but there's nothing they can do about it. For a long time, what I used to always say, anytime somebody says, "What'd you have?" Now, you can't say yes to that one. So what I used to always say is pocket aces. I mean, it didn't matter if there were like 3 aces on the board. But the whole idea here is you can have fun with it, and you can be creative, and you just want to say as few syllables as possible that will end the conversation.
And that ends the conversation about right speech table poker, right?
Yes.
How has the study of right speech improved your life?
It's improved my life considerably in many ways. Most obvious one, I guess, is that it took the foot out of my mouth, which is where it used to spend a lot of time. I used to very often say things I immediately regretted or regretted a little afterwards. Gossip is an example of wrong speech, and I'm able to stop myself before those words come out. A lot of language is just cruel and toxic, and we hear it all the time and we think it's just normal, but it's just part of human conditioning to say things that are mean.
You won't use the word hate.
No, I won't use the word hate because I just don't feel hate, which is a big change that has happened. As we talked about earlier, right speech is closely tied with right view. Once someone takes on right view, fundamentally and deeply inside, right speech just follows from that because there are certain views and ideas that are changed. poisonous words that just can be eliminated. And when they're eliminated from our speech, it means they're eliminated from our mind and from our thinking. And it's not easy to do this because our conditioning is strong. But with the practices that we went through in episode 3 of mindfulness and mindfulness practice, that's the key thing, is the training of the mind, the focusing on the breathing, and you train yourself to be able to stop right in the middle of the conversation and not have those toxic words come out.
It's all about breathing.
It does ultimately come back to breathing. That is the ultimate practice. A couple other aspects of right speech. Blaming is another key concept. The act of not blaming other people for things, or even blaming yourself. So through mindfulness, you can come to recognize anytime blame shows up, and you come to learn that it's a form of cruelty when you blame someone for anything. And another thing that sort of evaporates away is the idea of justice and injustice. You feel like, well, I didn't get what I deserved, and that's another source of that's a form of suffering, and suffering is ultimately the cause of wrong speech. And so as we undo our suffering through these practices, wrong speech evaporates away, and all that's left is right speech.
I have to confess, one thing that I have learned through this time with you is I've looked closer at why I do things. And right speech is one of the most important ones because A, I talk too much. I tend to stick the needle in a lot. And I often speak before I think. And I figured out something not long ago that I tend to tap on the aquarium, as we all know. And the reason why I do that, I suffer a bad beat, and it's humiliating. It's an ego thing. And I don't want to look like an idiot, so I try to punish the guy who gave me the bad beat.
Right.
I want him to hurt. I'm hurt.
Right.
I'm suffering. I'm really hurting from taking a bad beat, and I want to give it back. I don't want to suffer anymore. Or misery loves company. I want him to feel my pain.
Yeah.
And it's an ego thing. I don't want to look stupid, and I just got beat. And
so you say things.
Say terrible things.
Yeah. That's a great awareness that you have just shared, and it's all about awareness. It's the first step to getting over any of this stuff, is being able to step back long enough to really evaluate and say, wow, when I'm in these situations, I say things that would be better off not said. And then you dig deeper, and as you did, you get to the real cause, which is, I want that guy to suffer because he made me suffer. And you just keep digging at it and digging at it, and this is the path to eliminate these things.
All right, let's wrap this puppy up.
Okay, let's do some right quitting. Wait a second. This is right speech.
This is right speech. And
Okay.
I have an idea.
Let's hear it.
I have an idea for right quitting, which incorporates right view, right thinking, right speech, and right quitting.
Let's hear it.
No matter what happens, no matter how good the night was or how bad the night was, leave with a smile on your face. If you're playing live, say goodnight to the desk person. Say goodnight to the floor person. Say, I'll see you tomorrow. I hope you have a ball.
I like it.
If you're playing online, type something in the chat box, or better yet, if it's 2 o'clock in the morning, send an email to a friend. Something that'll make them smile when they get up in the morning.
Great idea.
Whatever you do, always leave with a smile on your face.
Which will put a smile in your mind, too, right?
You'll sleep better, you'll live better, life will be better, and poker's not going to get you down. So it's right view leads to right thinking, leads to right speech, which leads to right quitting.
Wow.
Mindfulness.
Nice.